"She's not breathing, right?" Oliver whispered, eyes wide and fists clenched at his sides. "My mom's not breathing, right?" No one listened. The receptionist barely glanced up from her keyboard. "Sweetie, your nanny's probably looking for you. You shouldn't be up here." Oliver took a shaky step forward, his voice thin and urgent. "Please." She went to the garage and she's not answering her phone. I heard something. A loud sound. The guard near the elevator frowned. "You're not supposed to be wandering around up here alone. Where's your badge?" "I have it." Oliver pulled the small plastic keycard from his hoodie pocket, blue with a red rocket sticker in the corner. "Mom lets me use it when I go to the kids' room. But she's not okay. I know she's not. Buddy, let's call your nanny." But Oliver didn't wait. He turned and ran past the security desk, past the glass-walled conference rooms where executives murmured behind polished tables, down the executive hallway of Rhodes MedTech, where nobody looked low enough to see a child in distress. Except one person. Third floor. The smell of lemon disinfectant clung to the walls. Mops and wax buckets rested beside yellow caution signs. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic swish of cloth on tile. Ethan Wells didn't look up at first. He'd scrubbed the same stretch of floor every Friday morning for the past 3 years. He moved without thinking, left to right, right to left. A man invisible by design. Then came the voice. "Sir, please." He turned. A small boy stood in front of him, breathless panic in his eyes, holding a keycard in one hand and trembling with the other. "They hurt." "My mom," Oliver said, chest heaving. "She won't wake up." Ethan's expression didn't change, but he dropped the mop. "Where the garage? Basement level. Now." Ethan didn't ask for more. He grabbed a canvas satchel from beside the janitor's cart and slung it over his shoulder. "Let's go." The elevator beeped and slid open. Oliver tapped his card again, the doors responding with a quiet ding. He had permission for this floor. For 3 floors, actually. Mom had told him never go higher than 3, never leave without her. But this was different. They descended fast. Basement 2. Garage level. Dim lights buzzed overhead. Oil stains stretched across the concrete like veins. An SUV door was flung open. A file folder lay torn beside it, papers strewn like broken feathers. Nearby, a figure lay crumpled near a support column. Vivian Rhodes, CEO, mother. She wasn't moving. Ethan was already there, kneeling. His movements weren't frantic. They were measured, controlled, familiar. "Stay here," he said to Oliver. "I need space to work." "But talk to her. But don't touch her, okay?" Oliver nodded, wiping his nose with his sleeve. Ethan opened the satchel. Inside wasn't cleaning equipment. It was a device matte gray handheld with a faint blue glow. He powered it up. The interface blinked to life with soft beeps and a field of digital vitals. Athena scan. He hovered the scanner just inches above Vivian's chest and abdomen. The readout formed quickly elevated heart rate, internal bruising, shallow respiration, abdominal trauma, possible, concussion. Blunt force trauma, he muttered. No spinal misalignment. Pulse weak but stable. Airway intact. He moved fast, stabilized her neck with a folded jacket, propped her into the recovery position, checked pupil response, cleaned the small cut on her temple, packed it with gauze. Every motion was efficient, quiet, focused. "Are you a doctor?" asked a voice. A young security officer had appeared wide-eyed, holding a radio. "I called 911. Ambulance ETA 7 minutes. 7 minutes is too long if her lungs collapse," Ethan said. "Bring blankets, anything dry and warm." Okay." The guard sprinted off. Oliver inched closer. "Will she be okay?" Ethan looked at him. The boy's eyes were big and red. His fists trembled slightly at his sides, though he tried to hide it. "You were smart to get help," Ethan said. "You did the right thing." "But will she be okay?" "I'm doing everything I can," Ethan said gently. "But she needs a hospital. Right now, we keep her breathing and warm." Vivian groaned. Her fingers twitched. "Mom," Oliver gasped. She moved. "She's trying to wake," Ethan said. "But don't shake her. Let her come to slowly." Vivian's lips parted. Her voice was barely a whisper. Her head rolled to one side, eyes fluttering half open. "Mom, I'm here," Oliver whispered, kneeling beside her. "The janitor, he helped. He's helping you." Her gaze found Ethan blurred, unfocused. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. Then her eyes closed again. Sirens whined in the distance. Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly. 3 minutes later, the paramedics arrived. They paused when they saw Vivian, when they saw the scanner, when they saw Ethan. "Who the hell are you?" one of them asked. "Just someone who was nearby," he replied. They checked her vitals, cross-referenced the data on their tablets with what Ethan had already stabilized. "This is clean work," one medic murmured. "You a paramedic?" Ethan shook his head. "Military." He didn't answer. They loaded Vivian onto the stretcher. One paramedic hesitated. "This scanner. Where did you get this?" Ethan looked at the Athena scan, its screen now dark. "It's an old project. Never seen anything like it." Ethan offered no more. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens faded, Ethan turned away. The elevator doors closed behind them as they returned to the lobby. Oliver stood quietly beside him, staring at the floor. "You saved her," the boy said softly. "You had that machine. You fixed her." Ethan adjusted the strap on his satchel. "You saved her," he corrected. "You didn't wait. You ran." Oliver looked up. "Are you going to get in trouble for having that thing?" Ethan almost smiled. "No," he said, "but people might start asking questions." "Is that bad?" Ethan exhaled. "Depends who's asking." They stepped out of the elevator. People were starting to gather. Security guards murmured. A nurse from the on-site clinic pointed toward Ethan. He turned to Oliver. "If they ask you anything, just tell the truth." "Okay," Oliver nodded, then hesitated. "Will I see you again?" Ethan gave him the smallest of smiles. "I'll be around. I clean the 3rd floor." Oliver stared after him as Ethan walked away, disappearing into the hallway mop bucket, waiting as if he'd never left. The hospital hallway hummed with low voices and sterile lights. Nurses moved like clockwork. Machines beeped in rhythms that spoke of pain and hope. Vivian Rhodes lay unconscious in room 403, a tangle of IV lines and quiet monitors. A deep, purple bruise was spreading across her left temple. Her breathing had stabilized, but doctors had yet to predict the extent of internal damage. She was lucky, too, lucky some would whisper. Downstairs in the ER waiting area, a pair of paramedics stood over a small table speaking in hushed tones. "It wasn't a prototype I've seen before," said the younger one, tapping a pen against his clipboard. "Clean design. Ultra portable. No brand label." "It wasn't even FDA stamped," the other muttered. "That thing ran diagnostics faster than our entire trauma kit, and the guy using it moved like he'd done this 100 times. I asked if he was military. He said nothing. The nurse at the desk looked up, talking about the janitor." Both men turned. "Yeah," the younger medic said. "That guy wasn't just a janitor." Hours later, in the soft glow of her private room, Vivian stirred. Oliver was the first to notice. He rushed to her bedside, clutching her hand like a lifeline. "Mom, you're awake." Her eyes fluttered open, slowly heavy with sedative fog. She blinked up at the ceiling, then at Oliver's tear-streaked face. "What happened?" Her voice was dry, brittle. "You fainted in the garage," Oliver said softly. There was a loud bang. "You didn't wake up." I got help." Vivian's brows furrowed. "Help a man. He works at the building. He saved you. With this little gray machine. He knew what to do. Everything." Vivian frowned. "Security?" "No," Oliver said. "The janitor." That night, Vivian requested access to the building's internal logs. Her executive clearance made it easy. A soft ding on her phone brought up the time-stamped security footage from the garage level. At 3:19 p.m., she saw her own figure collapse by the pillar. At 3:22 p.m., a man appeared with a child, Oliver. The man knelt beside her, opened a gray device. Vivian paused the footage. There it was, the device, compact handheld, sleek matte finish, a glowing blue core. Her breath caught in her throat. It was unmistakable. 6 years ago, when she'd just taken the reins of Rhodes MedTech after her father's death, the R&D department had begun building a concept based on early sketches they claimed came from a disbanded startup. Caleb Moore, CFO, and her father's old business partner had promised her it was proprietary, reverse-engineered from market trends, he said. The result was what became the Moorescan, the flagship of Rhodes's emergency diagnostics line. But this device in the janitor's hand looked like the sketches from year zero, long before Caleb ever presented his modified version. Vivian narrowed her eyes. There was something else, too. The man. The janitor. She zoomed in. Calm under pressure. Every movement precise. Steady hands, no hesitation. She called up his employee profile. Ethan Wells. Age 39. Janitorial services. Hired 3 years ago through a third-party contractor. No degree listed, no photo on file. Background check minimal. A ghost on paper. Too clean. Too deliberate. Vivian leaned back against her pillow. The dull ache in her side throbbed, but her mind spun faster. She knew Caleb. He was efficient, yes, but also arrogant. He never built anything himself. He bought, absorbed, acquired. If this janitor's device was real, if it predated Moorescan, then someone had stolen from someone. And she was beginning to suspect who had been stolen from. The next morning, Vivian hobbled into the Rhodes MedTech R&D archive on the top floor. Her assistant tried to stop her. "Ms. Rhodes, the board wants you on rest orders. I'll rest when I'm not being lied to," she snapped. Inside the vault-like server room, she pulled up the original patent trails filed under Caleb's name. One caught her attention. Moorescan F1DX filed February 18th, 6 years ago. She opened the attachments, design sketches, code fragments, hardware specs, timestamps. Now she opened a second window and cross-checked with old internal memos from her father's final year before passing one involving a minor funding grant to a small medical startup called BioSense, flagged in the financials. She searched BioSense plus Rhodes MedTech plus 7 years ago. There it was, Project Athena Diagnostics, lead engineer Ethan Wells. Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. Ethan Wells hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. He'd been here before. 7 years ago, his company had pitched a mobile trauma diagnostic tool to Rhodes. It had promise, but the project was shelved after Ethan was involved in a near-fatal car crash. The company folded. Caleb had quietly absorbed the remnants. 2 weeks later, Moorescan's first concept had been filed. Vivian whispered under her breath. He stole it. She stared out the office window for a long time, watching traffic below the early sunlight bouncing off polished glass towers. Then she made a call. Security. Yes, Ms. Rhodes, find Ethan. Wells, the janitor. Bring him to me. Now. A pause. Is something wrong? No, she said. Something's finally about to be right. Down on the 3rd floor, Ethan was finishing the last of the baseboards along the east wing. He wore the same charcoal gray jumpsuit he always did. His satchel rested nearby, zipped shut. 2 guards approached. One offered a half nod. Mr. Wells, the CEO would like to see you. Ethan didn't flinch. He just wiped his hands with a rag. About yesterday, we weren't told. He exhaled slowly, then stood. Lead the way. As he stepped into the executive suite, Vivian looked up from behind her desk. Her cheek was still bruised, her ribs tightly wrapped, but her voice sharp, steady. You're not a janitor. Ethan said nothing. She stood. You're Ethan Wells, founder of BioSense, creator of Athena Scan. Still no reply. I looked through 7-year-old archives. Your name's on every schematic, every dev note, every early firmware block. Then, bam, you vanish. Caleb takes over, and now you're mopping floors with the damn machine strapped to your back. He folded his arms. Your son is brave, Ethan said quietly. He didn't wait for permission. He just ran. That's why you're still alive. I want the truth, Vivian said. Why are you here? Why disappear? Why let someone like Caleb walk free while you clean bathrooms? There was a pause. Ethan's voice was steady. Because I buried my wife and lost my daughter to a system that only cares about paperwork. Because after the crash, Caleb showed up with lawyers and signatures I don't remember agreeing to. He filed my patent under his name while I was still on a hospital gurney. Vivian's eyes softened. You could have fought him. I did, for months. But grief buries energy. When the courts dismissed my claim for insufficient evidence, I gave up. Then why save me? Ethan looked at her, and for a second his voice cracked. Because my daughter still thinks I'm someone worth looking up to. Vivian hadn't been inside her childhood home in almost 5 years. But now bruised and wrapped in gauze, she stood in the same foyer where her father once taught her the rules of power. He used to say, you don't win by being right. You win by being ready. She wasn't ready when Caleb Moore stole everything under her nose. But now she was wide awake. Oliver was curled up on the leather couch in the study, a book about marine animals open on his lap. He looked up when she entered and immediately set it down. Are you okay now? He asked, voice small but steady. I am. Vivian said, lowering herself into the seat beside him. Thanks to you. Oliver didn't smile. He just leaned into her side. Mom, he said, was I wrong to run? Vivian blinked. Wrong security told me to wait. But I didn't. I broke the rules. She wrapped her arm around him tightly. You didn't break anything, sweetheart. You saved my life. He nodded slowly, but his eyes remained troubled. Then he whispered, Is the janitor going to get in trouble? Vivian pulled back, studying his face. Why do you ask that? Because he helped. But he didn't say anything when the ambulance came. He just left. Vivian exhaled slowly. No, honey, she said. I don't think he's the one who should be worried. The next morning, Vivian sat behind her office desk at Rhodes MedTech HQ, ankle still sore, ribs taped heartburning with clarity. Her executive assistant, Beth, walked in holding a thin manila file. I pulled what I could on Ethan Wells, Beth said, placing it gently on the desk. Vivian opened it. 1 page, no resume, no references, no photo, just a line of contracted janitorial work from the company's outsourced labor partner. Is this it? Vivian asked. Beth looked uneasy. He doesn't even have a company email. HR flagged him as a ghost hire last year, but it didn't go anywhere, probably because he keeps to himself. No complaints, no conversations, just work. Vivian frowned. I need badge access logs, where he's been in the building. When he enters, leaves. Beth hesitated. You think he's a threat? Vivian's voice was cold and even. I think he's the only person in this building I can trust. Downstairs in the R&D department, Vivian stood in front of a large glass display case, the original Moorescan prototype retired, now used only for branding events and nostalgia. She studied its shape, the body, the size, the screen interface. Her pulse picked up. It was nearly identical to the device she saw Ethan use on the security footage, only the edges were different, sleeker, smoother, less commercialized, a pure version, the real version. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a print of an internal schematic from 6 years ago, one labeled Moorescan UI Beta 1. Then another file, an old archive from BioSense recovered from a backup Caleb had never bothered to encrypt. Her hands shook slightly as she overlaid the 2 pages on the glass. They matched. Same diagnostic logic tree, same core module sequence, same pulse map algorithm signature, but the timestamp's Biosenses version was dated 8 months earlier than the Moore-scan prototype. Vivian whispered under her breath. Son of a... She stormed into the executive suite, ignoring the pain in her side. Caleb Moore was already there, sitting with a glass of scotch in one hand and his polished loafers resting arrogantly on the edge of the coffee table. Well, he said, not even bothering to stand. You're alive. That's inconvenient. Vivian narrowed her eyes. You always did talk better when you thought I was half dead. Caleb smiled, thin and practiced. What brings you hobbling into my office? Viv, shouldn't you be resting or dictating your memoir? She threw the folder on the table. The schematics, the timestamps, the footage still. Caleb barely glanced down. You've been digging, he said. And I found gold. He took a sip of his drink, unfazed. So what? You think you've uncovered something new, Vivian? Those early files are meaningless. Biosense signed over all their tech in the settlement years ago. Vivian's tone was ice. The settlement happened while Ethan was in a trauma ward with brain swelling and zero legal counsel. You and I both know he never signed anything knowingly. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Careful. That sounds like an accusation. It's a fact, she said. And I have more coming. Caleb leaned back, tilting his head. Let me give you some advice, he said smoothly. You're CEO because your daddy left you the chair. I kept this place alive. I took risks. And yes, I absorbed a few things along the way. But that's the cost of business. You think the board cares where the tech came from? They care that it sells. Vivian's lips curled into a cold smile. Then, maybe it's time the board saw what happens when someone builds their empire on stolen bones. Caleb chuckled. You won't get far, Vivian. You don't have the stomach for real war. She stepped closer. I don't need a stomach for war, she said. I have Ethan Wells. And he has the code. For the first time, something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Not fear, but recognition. Then, I guess he said, finishing his scotch, we're all about to find out what happens when a ghost decides to speak. Back in her car, Vivian sat in silence. Outside, traffic moved. Pedestrians laughed. Life carried on. But in her chest, something seismic shifted. For years, she had lived in the shadow of other people's ambitions, her father's, Caleb's, the board's. But now she saw a chance to make things right. Not just for her, not just for Ethan, but for the company her father once dreamed of before it became a machine of profit over people. Vivian looked up through the windshield. Somewhere out there was a man who had built a miracle and been robbed of everything. It was time to put his name back on what he made. You don't erase a man like Ethan Wells, Vivian whispered to herself. You just hope he never remembers who he used to be. She stood alone in her late father's private archive room, one of the few places inside Rhodes MedTech untouched by corporate polish. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. Shelves lined the walls filled with legacy documents, signed contracts, and dusty prototypes. A digital lock had once protected this room, but the access code her father's birthday hadn't changed in 10 years. Vivian traced her fingers along a drawer labeled Subsidiary Projects. 7 years ago. She pulled it open. Dozens of thin, laminated folders, most forgotten, all ignored. Near the back, she found what she was searching for, Biosense Technologies, a small startup that once pitched diagnostic tools for field medics. The file was faded but intact. She scanned the contract summary. Project Athena Prototype Development. Lead engineer Ethan Wells. Contracted via Biosense. Duration 9 months. 9 months. And then nothing. The final note chilled her. Project closed. Prototype rights assumed under Rhodes MedTech legal transfer facilitated by C. Moore. There was no signature from Ethan, only a stamped memo from Caleb Moore with the word settled scrawled beside it. Vivian frowned. She turned to her laptop, pulled up a secure legal database, and typed in Athena scan. Patent. The screen loaded slowly. And then, Application denied. Dated just 2 weeks after the car accident that nearly killed Ethan. Denied due to prior similar design filed under Moorescan Technologies. Primary inventor Caleb Moore. A beat of silence filled the room. It all clicked. Caleb didn't just steal the prototype. He timed his move to coincide with Ethan's personal tragedy. Vivian leaned back in the chair, heart pounding. He took everything from him, she murmured. His name, his invention, his voice. That night, Vivian pulled up to a modest brick building in the south side of Portland, far from Rhodes Medtech's glass towers and sleek lobby floors. A faded sign read, Eastwood Community Outreach Center. Children's drawings fluttered on the windows. Inside, a soft hum of activity. Folding chairs, whiteboards, the smell of coffee and dry erase markers. She followed the sound of a man's voice, low and calm, echoing from a back room. And if someone collapses, check the airway first. Pulse second. Never assume they're gone. Vivian stepped through the door quietly. Ethan Wells stood at the front of the room holding a worn-out CPR dummy. His sleeves were rolled up, voice steady as daughter Sophie sitting quietly in the corner with a box of crayons. He didn't see her at first, but when the class ended and the attendees filtered out, he looked up. Their eyes met. For a long moment, no one said a word. Then Vivian took a step forward. "I know who you are," she said. Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm a janitor," he replied. She shook her head. "You're more than that." He gave a tired smile. "Not anymore." They sat in the small kitchen area as Sophie napped on a beanbag chair nearby. Vivian slid the BioSense file across the table. Ethan stared at it but didn't reach for it. "I've seen this before," he said softly. "Or what's left of it." "You designed Athena's scan," she said. "Didn't you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water with steady hands. "I designed it for my wife," he said finally. "She was a trauma nurse. We wanted to build something that could work where ambulances couldn't go, field hospitals, natural disasters, war zones." Vivian's voice was quiet, and Caleb, he was the one who said he could get us funding. My startup was drowning. I trusted him. He looked away. Then came the accident. Vivian nodded. The timing was convenient. "I lost her," Ethan whispered. "Lost the baby we were expecting. I lost everything that day." Vivian closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." Ethan looked at her. "And you, what's your role in all this guilt curiosity?" She met his gaze. "Justice." He raised an eyebrow. "For me?" "For the company," she said. "For what my father built. For what it was supposed to be. And yes, for you. Because no one should be erased like this." He gave a bitter laugh. "You think an apology and a headline will fix it?" "No," she said. "But I think exposing the truth might stop it from happening again." He studied her for a long time. Then finally he said, "I didn't put my name on that device for recognition. I put it there so if it failed, people would know who to blame. It wasn't just a machine. It was a promise." Vivian leaned in. "Then help me keep it." Outside, the night air was cool. Vivian opened her car door, then paused. "You saved my life, Ethan." He shrugged. "I didn't do much. You did everything, and now you can do more." He glanced at the sleeping Sophie in the window. "I gave up that world a long time ago," he said. "It doesn't welcome people like me anymore." Vivian stepped closer. "Then, change the world to make room for people like you." She held out a folded piece of paper, her personal access card to Rhodes Medtech's R&D mainframe. "If you want to know how deep Caleb's lies go," she said, "this is your way in." Ethan didn't take it at first, but as their eyes locked, something shifted in his face. A crack in the wall. He reached out and took the card. That night, back at the community center, Ethan sat alone staring at lines of code from a stolen system he once built with his own hands. Behind him, Sophie stirred in her sleep. On the floor beside her lay a new drawing. It was of a hospital, and at the center of it was a tall man in a white coat. She had written in shaky letters, "This is my daddy. He helps people." Ethan ran a hand over his face, and then turned back to the screen. The emergency dummy made a soft thud as it hit the gym mat. Ethan knelt beside it, his movements calm and deliberate. Around him, a small circle of teenagers and young adults, some in hoodies, others in worn scrubs, watched intently. If the airway's blocked, don't panic. Tilt the head back, breathe twice, watch the chest, count to 10. Then again. His voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who had seen death and refused to let it win. At the back of the room, little Sophie sat cross-legged with a box of crayons and a clipboard. She hummed quietly as she drew. One of the teens raised a hand. "Mr. Ethan, what if it's someone you know?" Ethan paused, hand still on the dummy's shoulder. He looked up, eyes steady. Then, you remember that saving them isn't just about skill. It's about staying calm when your heart is screaming. Silence followed. One of the teens nodded slowly, the weight of the message sinking in. After class, Ethan helped stack the chairs, moving like a man who didn't mind the silence. Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, I made a new picture." He smiled and crouched to her level. She held up a crayon drawing stick figures under a big red cross. "That's you helping people, and that's me watching." Ethan looked at the figure beside his. "Who's that?" he asked gently. "That's Miss Vivian. I made her a doctor, too." Ethan blinked. Before he could respond, a voice from the door said, "That's quite the promotion." Vivian stood just inside the frame, arms folded, but her expression was soft. "May I come in?" Ethan rose slowly. "It's your community center." "No," she replied. "It's yours. I just fund it." Minutes later, they sat across from each other in the modest break room, the hum of the soda machine masking the awkward quiet. Ethan sipped coffee from a paper cup. "You really don't miss the boardrooms?" Vivian asked. He shrugged. "I miss the clean coffee." She tilted her head. "Not the power. The validation I used to think I needed all that to be someone he said. Turns out the only person I needed to prove anything to died in a hospital bed while I was unconscious in one." Vivian winced at the rawness. "She was your wife." Ethan nodded. "Maya. She was 6 months pregnant when the truck hit us. I was driving back from a pitch meeting with Moore. We'd just gotten verbal approval for a grant." He exhaled slowly. "When I woke up, Caleb was already handling everything. Told me the company folded. Said my name was toxic after the crash. That I should take the insurance money, get help. And you believed him. I was barely functioning. I was in a psych facility for a month. I missed the funeral. I missed the birth. And the burial." Vivian looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "He used your grief as cover." Ethan nodded. And by the time I crawled back into the world, Athena wasn't mine anymore. Silence. Then Vivian whispered, "I'm sorry." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Sorry doesn't give her back, doesn't give our daughter a sister." Sophie peeked in, sensing the tension. "Are you okay, Daddy?" Ethan turned to her, voice instantly gentle. "We're just talking, sweet pea. Go play, I'll be right there." She nodded and disappeared down the hall. Vivian watched her go. "She's bright, strong. She's the reason I didn't jump off a bridge," Ethan said. "The day they let me out of the hospital, I had nowhere to go. But when I saw her again, she hugged me like I hadn't missed a day. I promised myself I'd never let her see me break again." Vivian leaned forward. "Then let her see you rise." Ethan glanced at her. She pulled a file from her bag, Schematics Audit Reports, Patent Claims. Caleb's fraud runs deep. Not just the theft of Athena, but the finances. Shell companies forged trials, diverted R&D funds. You're not just a witness, Ethan. You're the foundation. Without you, he can claim it was all theory. But with you—" She let the file rest on the table. "We prove it was stolen." He didn't answer. "You still think no one will listen to a janitor?" she pressed. He looked her in the eye. "If I walk into that boardroom, I don't want them to see a janitor." She held his gaze. "I want them to see the man who built the machine that saved the CEO's life. The man who taught CPR to kids who'd never seen a doctor. The man who raised a daughter when the world told him he couldn't raise himself." Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. "I want them to see Ethan Wells, the engineer, the father, the survivor." Ethan stared at the table for a long time. Then, slowly, he pushed the coffee cup aside and took the file. "I'll do it," he said. Vivian exhaled with quiet relief. "But not for revenge," he added. "Not for headlines. I'll do it because I want my daughter to know that her father didn't stay silent when the truth needed a voice." Vivian smiled. "That's all I hoped for." Later that evening, outside in the parking lot, Vivian opened her car door. "By the way," she said, pausing, "you ever wear a suit anymore?" Ethan chuckled. "Only to weddings and funerals." "Well," she said, "let's hope it's a wedding kind of day." She got in, started the engine, and drove away. Inside the center, Sophie tugged at Ethan's pant leg. "Can I stay up late?" Ethan lifted her into his arms. "Only if you help me design something important." Like a robot, he smiled. "Like the truth." "You hid a signature in the firmware?" Vivian asked, eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan didn't look up. He was already elbow-deep in lines of code from 7 years ago, the glow of 2 monitors reflecting in his eyes. "Not a signature," he murmured. "A fingerprint." They sat side by side in a dim, rented co-working office off Broadway, the walls still smelling of new paint and ambition. The kind of place where startups were born and stolen. Ethan's laptop was open to a legacy build of AthenaScan's original firmware. Vivian had managed to pull the old code from a defunct test server using an admin credential she'd never turned in when she became CEO. Ethan had compiled it next to the latest Morescan version downloaded from a public demo file. They cleaned it well, Ethan admitted, tapping a few keys. Caleb's team scrubbed most of the visible markers, even changed some variable names to throw off a forensic audit. Vivian leaned in. "So, it's useless," Ethan gave a faint smile. "No, because they didn't know where to look for the flaw." He opened a separate window. "Back then I built a recursive watchdog timer into the emergency diagnostic loop. It checks for system integrity every 12 seconds, scanning for backdoor firmware attacks." Vivian blinked. "I don't remember that in the original brief." "You weren't supposed to. Only the lead engineer had access. Caleb never saw this version." He zoomed in. "Here. Line 1824. There's a secondary loop that should return a Boolean value of true unless the scan logic has been modified." Vivian squinted. "That string." "Is that? It's my daughter's birthday," Ethan said quietly. "Encoded in hexadecimal. Only way to bypass the integrity check is if you know that key." Vivian exhaled slowly, and Caleb wouldn't. "Nope." He lifted the code, but he never understood it, just repackaged it with fancier colors and faster buttons. "But under the hood, it's still Athena." Ethan clicked another tab. Side by side, the AthenaScan and Morescan codes aligned perfectly until they didn't. There, he pointed. The Morescan version crashes the integrity check every 5th loop, which means every 5th emergency scan it ignores a segment of liver trauma data. Vivian froze. "Are you telling me that patients could be misdiagnosed because of this?" Ethan nodded grimly. A small enough miss to get past beta testing, but dangerous enough in a real trauma situation. She whispered, "That could have killed me in that garage." He didn't reply. Vivian backed away from the monitor like it had burned her. "We have to show this to the board." "We can't just show them," Ethan said. "We have to make them understand. This isn't just a technical error. It's a moral failure covered by theft." He turned to her. "I need full access. Back-end admin, root directory. Vivian hesitated. That would mean bypassing security firewalls. Internal audit would be notified. Caleb's people could catch us before we finish. Then we don't finish, Ethan said, until we've embedded this flaw into a board-level presentation they can't ignore. We don't give them a question, we give them a verdict. Vivian stared at him. Okay, she said finally. You'll have it by morning. That night, Ethan sat on the couch in his small apartment, a blanket draped over his legs. Sophie curled up asleep beside him with her arms around a stuffed koala. He watched her chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. On the table sat a printed copy of the original AthenaScan prototype, its edges yellowed and dog-eared. Across the top, scribbled in faded red pen, were the words, "To save even one." He'd written it the night his wife went into early labor. Ethan closed his eyes. He could still remember the first time he held the prototype. Still feel the tremor in his hands when he realized he'd made something that could give a second chance to people like Maya, to babies like the one they lost. Now that same device had been twisted, stolen, diluted, and used to build someone else's empire. And yet, it had still saved Vivian's life. It had still worked. Even broken, it had worked. He looked at Sophie again and whispered, "We're going to make it right, sweetheart." This time, Daddy won't be erased. The next morning, Vivian waited for him at the Rhodes MedTech executive floor, this time with a new access badge and a discreet tech support escort. "You have 4 hours," she said, handing over the security pass. Ethan nodded and entered the server lab. Within minutes, he bypassed the Morscan system's sandbox layer, pulled up firmware logs, and embedded a screenshot capture of the Boolean failure error, time-stamped and aligned with his original code signature. He added metadata logs showing his root access in 2016, flagged by name cross-referenced with server entries showing deletion under Caleb's credentials. Finally, he ran a comparison audit, a visual side-by-side animation that showed Morscan failing to detect trauma in 2 simulations that AthenaScan had passed cleanly. He saved it all to an encrypted drive. By noon, he walked into Vivian's office and handed her the file. "Everything you need is here," he said. "If they don't believe it after this, they're choosing not to." Vivian took the drive. "You just gave us our missile." Ethan smiled faintly. "Let's aim it carefully." That evening, standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror, Ethan adjusted the sleeves of his gray suit. It was the same one he'd worn to Maya's funeral, the same one he'd promised he'd never wear again, until now. Sophie peeked out from the bedroom holding a tiny rubber band. "Daddy," she whispered, "you forgot this." He crouched. "What is it, Bug?" "It's our lucky one. The pink one we found on the playground. You said we keep it for special days." He smiled and held out his wrist. She wrapped the rubber band over his suit cuff. "Today's a special day, right?" Ethan met her eyes. "It is." He kissed her forehead and stood. Outside, Vivian's car was already waiting. As Ethan opened the door, she looked up from the driver's seat, eyes scanning his suit. "You clean up well." "I was hoping you'd say that," he replied. She looked at him a moment longer, then put the car in gear. "Let's go remind them who built their empire." The room went silent the moment Ethan stepped in. Boardroom 4B at Rhodes MedTech was glass-walled and clinical, with high-backed leather chairs arranged in a cold, circular hierarchy. The scent of espresso and polished wood still hung in the air, leftovers from decades of power plays and million-dollar votes. Vivian walked in first, calm and composed. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she made her way to the head of the table. Ethan followed. He wore a simple gray suit. No tie, no designer shoes, just confidence and something quiet in his eyes that unsettled everyone. Caleb Moore raised an eyebrow from across the table. His navy pinstripe blazer glinted subtly under the lights. "Well," Caleb said with a smirk, leaning back in his chair, "didn't expect housekeeping to join us today. Should I be worried my coffee machine's about to be repossessed?" Some board members chuckled politely. Others didn't. Vivian didn't smile. Thank you all for attending this emergency session. What we're about to present involves not only the integrity of Rhodes MedTech, but the lives of every patient our devices touch. Caleb yawned, tapping a pen against his notepad. Please. Let's skip the dramatics, Vivian. She nodded to Ethan. He stepped forward, set down a USB drive, and connected it to the main projector. As the lights dimmed, the first image flashed on screen 2 devices side by side. Athena scan, 2016. More scan, 2023. Then came the code comparison line by line, syntax to syntax, the embedded signature, the watchdog timer, the hexadecimal marker hidden in a diagnostic loop that only the original engineer would know. Ethan spoke slowly, deliberately. This is Athena's original firmware. You'll notice a recursive error check loop embedded here, line 1824. Now compare that to Moorescan's version. The loop is present, but it breaks every 5th cycle. He pressed a key. On the screen, a simulated scan of a trauma patient flickered. Athena scan highlighted internal bleeding in the liver. Moorescan missed it. Murmurs rippled through the room. Ethan continued, voice steady. This means that every 5th scan risks missing critical data. It's not a glitch. It's a side effect of lifting code without understanding its architecture. He turned to Caleb. You didn't steal the tech. You stole the shell. But you never understood the soul. Caleb scoffed, but tension crept into his posture. Vivian stepped in. There's more. She tapped the screen again. This time, metadata logs. Here we have system entries from 2016 showing Mr. Wells under his former company, BioSense, accessed root directories of Athena's firmware. 2 weeks later, his access was revoked. And Mr. Moore submitted a patent for Moorescan, with the same digital markers. Caleb laughed dryly. This is circumstantial. At best, it proves someone had similar ideas. It's not a crime to build on old work. Vivian didn't flinch. You're right, innovation builds on innovation. But theft is not innovation. She clicked once more. On screen appeared a spreadsheet, internal finance records. Now we move to the financial fraud. The room stiffened. These records show over $4.2 million in R&D transfer fees routed to an offshore entity called Blue Halcyon Holdings. On paper, this entity doesn't exist except as a ghost vendor you created, but the payment approvals all required administrator override, and the admin code used. She glanced at Ethan. It's the one he created, the one Caleb never had access to. A beat of stunned silence. Then Ethan spoke, his voice a low thunder. You used my code to fund your own heist. Caleb stood abruptly, his chair screeching back. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're taking the word of a janitor with a grudge. He was in a mental institution. I helped him after his breakdown. This is betrayal. Vivian stepped forward. You didn't help him. You erased him. And you used his pain as your alibi. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his tone remained calm. I buried my wife while you forged my signature. I lost custody of my daughter because I was in a hospital recovering from the accident you told the board was my fault. Caleb's face went pale. A security team stepped into the back of the room. Alongside them, 2 agents in dark suits, FBI. One of them pulled out a badge. Caleb Moore, you are under investigation for intellectual property theft, wire fraud, and obstruction of medical device certification. The room exploded in motion. Board members stood. Some gasped. Caleb tried to bolt, but the security team was already there. Ethan watched him being handcuffed. For a long moment he said nothing, but just as Caleb was being led out, he turned back. You know what the worst part is, Caleb, Ethan said softly. You had the tools to build something that saved lives, but you used them to build something that only fed your ego. Caleb didn't respond. The door shut behind him. Silence fell. A senior board member finally spoke. Ms. Rhodes, this changes everything. Vivian nodded. Yes, it does. Another leaned forward. And Mr. Wells, if what we saw is accurate, you are the rightful inventor of the Athena system. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked at the screen one last time. The Athena logo faded, but still standing strong. I was, he said. And maybe I still am. But that's not the point. He looked at them all. I didn't come here to reclaim my seat. I came here to reclaim the truth. That night, Ethan and Vivian didn't say much as they sat in the car. Outside, the lights of the city glowed warm and gold, blurred by the windshield fog. Finally, Vivian spoke. You didn't have to stay calm in there. I wasn't calm, Ethan replied. I was just done being angry. She turned to him. You changed everything today. No, he said. I just fixed what should never have been broken. She smiled. Then after a long pause, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. This came in an hour ago. The board voted unanimously. Your name's back on the patent, and your medical credentials are officially reinstated. Ethan took the folder. He didn't open it right away. He just stared at it. Quiet. Then he whispered, I didn't think I'd ever wear that name again. Vivian's voice softened. Maybe it never stopped wearing you. He turned to her. Their eyes met. And in the silence between them something shifted, not just in the air, but in their lives. Not just justice served, but hope returned. The air inside the half-built Athena Health Initiative Center still smelled like fresh drywall and possibility. No furniture yet. Just open space, echoing walls, and a patchwork of extension cords snaking across the concrete floor. In the center of it all, a large cardboard pizza box sat wide open, its cheesy warmth drawing everyone in like a campfire. Ethan sat cross-legged on a folded blanket, a screwdriver still tucked behind one ear as he fine-tuned the busted wheel of a small therapy robot. Oliver crouched beside him, eyes wide with wonder, handing him tools with the precision of a tiny surgeon. Phillips Ethan said, not looking up. Oliver rummaged in the toolbox, found the right screwdriver, and passed it over. You always fix things, Ethan chuckled softly. Only the ones worth saving. Oliver tilted his head. How do you know which ones are worth it? Ethan glanced at the boy. They don't give up on you even when they're broken. A few feet away, Vivian knelt beside Sophie, who was busy spreading out a new box of crayons across a large sheet of drawing paper. The little girl had already drawn a rainbow, a bunny, and what looked like a rocket ship wearing glasses. What's this one? Vivian asked, pointing to the rocket. Sophie smiled proudly. That's Daddy. He used to build flying machines, remember? Vivian's smile softened. I do remember. Sophie picked a deep blue crayon and started scribbling clouds. He says he doesn't fly anymore, but I think maybe he still remembers how. Vivian looked over at Ethan, who at that moment was tightening a bolt on the robot with the calm of someone piecing himself back together. I think you're right, she whispered. There were no couches, no rugs, no fancy fixtures, but somehow the empty space didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Sophie leaned against Vivian's side and pointed to her drawing. That's the new hospital. And this, she tapped a crooked little figure with big eyes and a stethoscope, that's you. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Me? Sophie nodded. Yep. You helped save my daddy's smile. Vivian blinked hard. Sweetheart, I think you just gave me a reason to never stop trying. Ethan stood wiping his hands on a rag. Robots fixed. For now. Oliver gave a triumphant cheer. Can we make it shoot lasers next? Only if your mom signs off, Ethan said with a grin. Strict no-weapon policy in the waiting room. Vivian stood as well, dusting off her jeans. We'll discuss lasers in the quarterly board meeting. They all laughed. It was the kind of laughter that didn't need effort, the kind that made the air feel lighter. The kind that hadn't existed for any of them just a few months ago. Vivian stepped over to Ethan and handed him a manila envelope. He opened it carefully. Inside, official documents stamped with the seal of the State Medical Board. License reinstated. Credentials restored. Ethics review cleared. I pulled a few strings, Vivian said, and submitted the paperwork you were too stubborn to fill out. Ethan stared at the paper for a long moment. His hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with something quieter. Reverence, maybe. Or the memory of a life he never thought he'd get back. This time, she said gently, "You're wearing the white coat on your own terms." He swallowed hard. I used to think that coat defined me, that without it, I wasn't worth anything. And now, Ethan looked around the room at the robot, the kids, the crayons, the laughter still echoing off the bare walls. Now I know the work, not the title, is what makes us matter. Vivian reached out, resting her hand briefly over his. "You're building more than a clinic here, Ethan. You're building a place where people like us, like who we used to be, can walk in and not feel invisible." He met her eyes. "Then let's make sure the door never closes." They stayed long after the pizza was gone. Sophie built a fort from moving boxes and named it Emergency Castle. Oliver programmed the robot to say "Hello, future patient" in a British accent. Ethan and Vivian sat quietly near the far wall watching the kids dance in the empty space. "This wasn't part of my 5-year plan," Vivian murmured. "Me, neither," Ethan said. "My plan was to mop floors until Sophie turned 18. She turned to him. "You really were okay with that," he thought for a moment. "I was okay with being invisible, until someone looked at me like I wasn't." Vivian's voice was soft. "I didn't just look." Ethan turned to face her fully. "No. You saw." They sat in silence for a beat. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss the old life every day?" he admitted. "But not the way you think." "How do you mean I miss the man I used to be, before the accident, before the bitterness, before I let anger become my shadow?" She nodded. "I know that man. I used to be the woman who built walls so tall I couldn't even hear my own heart." Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe we're both trying to remember how to live again." Vivian met his gaze. "Or maybe we're already doing it." Sophie came running over, waving another drawing. "Look, it's all of us. Me, Oliver, Daddy, and you, Vivian." Took the page and smiled. The stick figures were smiling, holding hands in front of a giant building labeled Athena. Ethan glanced at the drawing, then back at Vivian. "I used to think healing was about going backward," he said quietly. "But now, I think it's about building forward with the people who remind you that you're still worth building." Vivian blinked back the sudden warmth behind her eyes. "I think we're going to build something beautiful here, Ethan." He nodded, his voice rough. "We already have." The ribbon wasn't fancy. Just a strip of white cloth with Athena written in crayon across it, courtesy of Sophie and Oliver, who insisted that something built with love shouldn't be opened with cold steel scissors. Instead, the crowd of donors, volunteers, doctors, and families watched as the two kids stretched the cloth across the sliding doors, giggling under a soft spring sun. Ethan stood tall beside them, wearing a white coat for the first time in 7 years. It felt lighter than he remembered, not because the material had changed, but because this time it wasn't a costume hiding his scars. It was a choice. Vivian stepped up beside him, tailored navy blazer, crisp hair, tied back heels, clicking with each step like punctuation marks in a new chapter of her life. "All yours," she said quietly, gesturing toward the podium. Ethan blinked at her. "I thought you were giving the speech." Vivian smiled. "I gave enough speeches that didn't mean anything. This one does. It should come from someone who bled for it." He turned to the crowd. Their faces reflected hope, skepticism, curiosity, and gratitude. He cleared his throat. 7 years ago, he began. I was in a hospital room staring at the ceiling, wondering if anyone would ever say my name without pity again. A hush fell. I'd lost my wife, my work, my dignity, and if I'm being honest, I thought I'd lost my purpose. Vivian watched him, every word cutting deeper and lifting higher. I started over with a mop in one hand, and a daughter in the other, Ethan continued. She reminded me every single day that invisibility is a choice, and so is standing back up. Scattered applause. He paused, eyes drifting toward the Athena logo behind him, a sleek silver emblem shaped like a protective wing around a heartbeat. This building, Ethan said, voice firmer now, is not a hospital. It's not a clinic. It's not even a charity. He took a breath. It's a promise that no one who walks through these doors will be treated like a burden, that every life insured or not documented or not seen or ignored matters. The applause rose. Vivian's hand found her heart. Sophie clapped wildly. Oliver looked up at her and whispered, "He's kinda awesome." Vivian smiled. "He really is." Inside, the rooms smelled of fresh paint and hope. The waiting area had no glass barriers, no blaring TV. Just soft chairs, a lending library, a mini-play area, and artwork created by children from local schools. Behind the reception desk, a single sentence was etched into the wall. "Here nobody is invisible." Vivian had insisted on it. Ethan had nodded without a word. No edits needed. They walked the halls together after the ceremony. Nurses buzzed in and out of rooms. A former veteran named Hank, now a volunteer, greeted patients with a deep, gravelly, "Welcome, darlin'." A teenage receptionist named Layla had decorated her check-in tablet with stickers that read, "Breathe you matter, and let's try again tomorrow." "This place is alive already," Vivian whispered. Ethan nodded. "It has a heartbeat." They stopped outside exam room 1. Vivian turned to him. "You ever think we'd get here?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. "Then I didn't even know where 'here' was." She looked at him. "But you kept walking." He met her gaze. Because someone opened a door. Later that afternoon, the last patient had left, and the hallways quieted into a peaceful hum. Ethan sat in the main lobby coat draped over the back of his chair, watching Sophie and Oliver organize crayons by color at the front desk. Vivian joined him, 2 coffees in hand. "Double cream," she said, offering his. "No sugar. You don't trust sweet things that come too easy." Ethan smirked. "You remember everything. I remember what matters." They sipped in silence for a while. Then Vivian said, almost too softly, "When I built Rhodes MedTech, I thought success was about control, about efficiency, power, image." She exhaled. "But it took being powerless, watching my son cry for help I couldn't give, to understand that healing doesn't start in a lab. It starts in rooms like this. With people like you." Ethan looked down at his coffee. "I didn't save you," he said. "You did." "No," he insisted. "Your son did. He trusted a stranger when nobody else listened." She nodded. "And I'm grateful he did, because that moment gave us both a second chance." A long pause. Then Ethan whispered, "Do you ever think about what it cost?" Vivian turned to him. "You mean the years lost, the silence?" "The pain," he nodded. She set her coffee down. "I do, but I also think those years carved space in us for empathy, for humility, for purpose." She turned to him fully. "If I hadn't broken, I wouldn't have seen you." His eyes shimmered. "If I hadn't been invisible," he said, voice rough, "I wouldn't have recognized someone else looking for a way out." They sat like that for a while, just breathing, just being, until Sophie and Oliver ran over with matching grins and a new drawing, a giant wing sheltering a hospital, 2 stick-figure adults holding hands, and 2 kids waving beneath the words, "We found home." Ethan traced the crayon lines with his thumb, then looked at Vivian. "I think we're ready," he said. Vivian tilted her head. "For what?" He smiled. "For whatever comes next." It started with the slam of a door. A young mother burst into the Athena Health lobby barefoot, soaked in sweat, her arms trembling as she clutched a limp toddler to her chest. "My baby. He's not breathing. Please, please help us." Her scream cut through the gentle hum of the clinic like a lightning bolt. In 1 second, everything stilled, and in the next, everything moved. "I've got him," Ethan said, already reaching the child with hands that had known both invention and loss. The boy's body was seizing limbs, twitching eyes unfocused. No time for panic. No time for protocol. Only instinct. "Bring him in here," Ethan ordered, pointing to exam room 2. Vivian held the door as the mother stumbled in behind them, tears streaking down her face. "He has epilepsy. He was stable. I don't know what happened." Ethan gently laid the boy down on the exam table and pulled the AthenaScan device from his pocket sleeker, now more refined but still carrying the same essence of what had once been stolen. The screen lit up vitals, neurological activity, oxygen levels. "Seizure cluster," Ethan murmured. "He's not getting enough oxygen." He moved, fast-hooked up a pediatric oxygen mask, stabilized the boy's position, and initiated neuro-relief protocol built directly into the Athena software. "Breathe, little man," Ethan whispered. "You've got too many chapters ahead." 3 minutes felt like 30. Then, slowly, the boy's muscles relaxed. His chest rose in a more even rhythm. Color returned to his lips. The screen blinked green. Stable. The mother collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "You saved him. You actually saved him." Ethan didn't reply right away. He just looked at the device in his hands, steady, glowing alive. Then at the child breathing. Then at the mother shaking with relief. And something inside him quietly rewired. Later that evening, as the last patients filtered out and the hallways dimmed into twilight, Ethan stood alone in the supply room, the AthenaScan still in his hand. Vivian found him there, leaning against the counter, eyes lost in thought. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded, but didn't smile. Vivian stepped closer. "That little boy, you were the only reason he's still here tonight." "I know," Ethan said. "That's the part I can't stop thinking about." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned to her. 6 years ago, I watched that same screen flicker in a hospital and I couldn't get there in time. I wasn't allowed in the room." He swallowed hard. "I lost Rachel on the other side of that door. And part of me believed I didn't deserve to save anyone after that." Vivian's eyes softened. She didn't interrupt. "I built something to heal people," Ethan whispered. "But I never forgave myself for not healing the one who mattered most." Vivian stepped beside him, her voice low but unwavering. "Ethan, you didn't fail her. You were a man in pieces. But look what you did with those pieces." She pointed at the AthenaScan. "You turned grief into hope. You turned what was broken into something the world desperately needed." Ethan exhaled. "I used to think moving forward meant letting go, forgetting, replacing. But it doesn't." Vivian nodded. "No, it means carrying the memory with grace and building something beautiful beside it." A long pause. Then Ethan looked at her. "You ever wonder if we'll always live with the shadows?" She smiled faintly. "Of course we will. But the trick is, we don't have to sit in them." That weekend, Ethan and Sophie were at the park sitting under a tree with melting ice cream cones. Sophie leaned against his side, quiet. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked. She looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Always?" She hesitated. "Do you miss Mommy Ethan's?" Breath caught. "Yes," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Every single day." Sophie looked down at her hands. "Does that mean you don't like Miss Vivian Ethan?" Blinked. "No, sweetheart. Missing someone. And loving someone new. Those don't cancel each other out. Our hearts can grow. They're not jars with lids. They're gardens." Sophie frowned. "So, it's okay to keep Mommy in our garden, too." Ethan pulled her close. "Not only, okay, it's beautiful. She helped plant what makes us strong." Sophie nodded slowly, then smiled. "Then I think Mommy would like Miss Vivian. And Oliver. I think so, too." That night, as Ethan closed the clinic, he paused in front of the etched wall again. Here, nobody is invisible. And for the first time in years, he believed it applied to him, too. He turned off the lights, but the hallway still glowed, not from bulbs, from what they'd built. The auditorium of the Athena Health Initiative shimmered with soft, golden light. Rows of patients, doctors, volunteers, and families filled the seats, faces glowing with gratitude and awe. Balloons floated near the stage, their strings tangled playfully around bouquets of white lilies and paper hearts drawn by children from the free clinic. On the backdrop screen was a single phrase in bold letters, "1 year of healing. 1 year of hope." Ethan Wells stood behind the podium, his hands resting calmly on either side. He looked out at the sea of faces, familiar new changed, and took a slow, steady breath. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, "I never thought I'd stand behind another podium again." Laughter rippled lightly through the crowd. He smiled, not out of pride, but peace. A year ago, this was an empty building with no walls, no funding, no furniture, just a dream written in pencil on a napkin, and a few people crazy enough to believe in it. Vivian, seated near the front beside Oliver, and Sophie smiled quietly. Her eyes shimmered. Ethan continued, his voice warm and deliberate. "When I first picked up a mop at Rhodes MedTech, I didn't know I was sweeping the pieces of my own life back together. I thought I was just cleaning floors. But every quiet hallway taught me something about humility, about patience, about what it really means to serve." He paused, letting the silence breathe. "I used to think success meant having your name on a patent. Turns out it's seeing someone walk out of this place healed even if they couldn't pay a dime." The crowd applauded. Ethan smiled faintly, his voice steady as he went on. "This center was named Athena because she was the goddess of wisdom. But to me, she represents something simpler: courage. The courage to build again after everything's been taken. The courage to forgive the world without forgetting its lessons." He looked toward the first row. "To those who rebuilt this with me, Vivian, Oliver, Sophie, and every soul who walked through our doors, you reminded me that healing doesn't belong to hospitals or corporations. It belongs to people who care." When the applause finally faded, Vivian rose from her seat. "You're not done," she whispered with a knowing smile. Ethan blinked. "What? Look behind you," she mouthed. He turned. The screen had changed. A photo of the community center filled it. Ethan standing with Sophie, Vivian, and Oliver at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, all laughing. Beneath it, in elegant script, Founder Ethan Wells. The audience erupted again, standing in applause. Ethan's throat tightened. He looked back at Vivian, shaking his head slightly, half smiling, half speechless. "I didn't approve that," he said softly as she joined him on stage. She leaned in, her voice low. "Good." It wasn't a question. After the ceremony, the music began, a gentle acoustic melody floating through the air. Children ran between rows of chairs. Volunteers hugged patients. Photographs were snapped. Somewhere, a nurse started crying into a slice of cake. Ethan stood near the edge of the stage, looking out at the celebration, the kind of chaos that felt like home. Sophie tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, can I show Miss Vivian my new picture?" He smiled. "Of course, Bug." She ran off, but instead of handing Vivian the paper, she handed it to Oliver. Together they whispered, giggled, then dashed back toward Ethan, both holding the drawing like a secret treasure. Sophie grinned. "You can't look yet." "Why not?" Oliver announced proudly. "Because it's a surprise for when you're brave." Ethan chuckled. "Oh, I'm always brave." Sophie shook her head solemnly. "Not for this part." Before he could ask, the lights dimmed slightly. Vivian stood nearby, the crowd parting around her like a tide. "Oliver," she whispered. "Go on." Oliver walked up beside Ethan, holding a small velvet box. The crowd fell silent. Ethan frowned, confused. "Buddy." "What's this?" Oliver looked up at him, eyes shining. "Mom said if I ever met someone who made her smile again, I should help him ask the question." Ethan froze. Vivian stepped closer. He insisted she said softly. The entire room seemed to still, even the air holding its breath. Ethan looked down at the box, then at Oliver's hopeful face, then at Vivian, radiant, strong, human in every way that mattered. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. You two conspired. Vivian smiled, guilty. He sank down on one knee, partly to match Oliver's height, partly because his heart could no longer hold the weight standing upright. "Oliver Rhodes," he said, voice trembling with warmth, "would you mind helping me with something very important?" Oliver's grin widened. "Yes." Ethan turned to Vivian, the box still unopened. "You once told me healing starts when we stop fighting the past," he said. "I spent years trying to build machines that could save lives. But you showed me how to live one." Vivian's eyes shimmered. Ethan continued, voice soft but certain. "You and your son gave me a reason to believe again, not in science, not in redemption, but in family." He opened the box. A simple silver ring gleamed inside, nothing extravagant, just honest. "I can't promise you perfection," he said, "but I can promise you presence. I'll show up for you for them for whatever comes next." Oliver tugged Vivian's hand. "Say yes, Mom." Vivian laughed through tears. "Yes. 1,000 times. Yes." Applause thundered through the hall. Sophie jumped into Ethan's arms, squealing, "We're a family now." Ethan held her tight as Vivian embraced them both. The four of them, bathed in soft light, surrounded by people clapping, smiling, crying strangers, turned witnesses to something that felt sacred. Later that night, long after the guests had gone, the lights of the Athena Center glowed faintly against the quiet sky. Ethan walked through the halls alone, coat slung over his arm steps, slow, thoughtful. He paused at the wall, engraving, "Here nobody is invisible." He reached out, tracing the letters with his fingertips. Then he whispered, "Not anymore." From down the hall, Vivian called softly, "You coming, Dr. Wells?" He turned, smiling at the title. For the first time, it didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. He walked toward her, toward the sound of laughter spilling from the doorway, Sophie and Oliver building a pillow fort out of folded chairs, Vivian pretending to scold them, but failing to hide her smile. Ethan joined them, sitting cross-legged on the floor as the children collapsed into giggles. Sophie looked up. "Daddy, what are we going to do tomorrow?" He thought for a moment. "Whatever helps someone else find their tomorrow." Vivian reached for his hand. Outside, the city lights flickered like a heartbeat. And on the front door of the Athena Health Initiative, a child's new drawing fluttered in the evening breeze. 4 stick figures under a glowing sun with one simple sentence written across the top. "Here, nobody is invisible, and sometimes healing doesn't begin in hospitals. Sometimes it begins in the quiet strength of a janitor, in the laughter of 2 children, or in the moment someone dares to believe again not in machines but in love." If you've ever witnessed a quiet act of kindness, if someone unexpected once helped you through a dark chapter, or if you've seen hope bloom where no one thought it could, we'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments, and tell us, where are you watching from today? Your voice matters here. This is more than just a story, it's a community, and you're part of it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, stories that remind us we're not alone, that healing is possible, and that sometimes the quietest people leave the loudest impact. Thank you for spending your time with us. We'll see you in the next story.